In 1981, on one of the most beautiful estates in Ireland, a father was teaching his children. Not Latin, not horse riding. He was teaching them to check under the car every morning. Little palms slide across the cold metal. Children's eyes search not for a lost ball, but for wires. This became their morning prayer, a ritual of survival in their own paradise. Do you think this is a story about terrorism? No. The explosion that nearly killed their father was merely an echo of a hatred that had been building for 400 years. I will tell you why the beauty that was supposed to be their armor became a target itself, and what original sin lies in the very foundation of this perfect house for which its inhabitants are still being built. Here, in the heart of County Tyrone, time seems to have stopped, lulled by the silence of artificial lakes and the arrogance of Georgian stone. The air is thick, smelling of damp earth, cut grass, and eternity. The house observes its reflection in the dark water, and in that reflection, there is not a single crack. A perfect lawn, trimmed with a surgeon's precision. Perfect roof lines, drawn by the hand of a genius. A perfect silence, broken only by the rustling of old trees, like the whisper of conspirators. This is Baronscourt, a world created by the will of one man to lock the chaos outside. But it's a deception. Every inch of this idyll is soaked in fear. 1981. A morning, just as clear and serene. A car moves slowly down the driveway, as long as an aristocrat's life. And in this morning silence, there is a sound that should not be here. Not the crack of a hunting rifle, not the thud of a fallen tree, the deafening crack of tearing metal. The earth shudders, ancient oaks shed their leaves, and a flock of birds, disturbed in their centuries-old peace, freezes in the sky like a black cloud. This was the sound of a hatred that had been building for 400 years, an echo that has not faded for decades. In that car sat a man whose only crime was his family name. He survived, but the explosion left a scar not only on his body. It carved a deep furrow across the flawless facade of this house. It was a reminder that walls, no matter how thick, cannot protect from the ghosts of the past. After that day, life here changed forever. The children of lords and ladies learned a new lesson, one not taught in their expensive schools. The father taught his children, not Latin, not horse riding, to check under the car. Little palms slide across the cold metal of the chassis. Children's eyes search not for a lost ball, but for wires leading to an explosive. This became their morning prayer, a ritual of survival in their own paradise. Baronscourt is not a palace. It is a fortress, besieged by an unseen enemy. The long driveway is not an invitation. It is a line of fire. The windows are not for letting in light. They are embrasures in an invisible war. And the silence, that perfect silence, is no longer calming. It rings with tension. Every rustle outside the window, every crunch of gravel under the wheels of a stranger's car is a potential death sentence. These walls were built to keep the world out. Now they keep their masters in. A golden cage, where even the air is electric with anticipation of the next blow. For what? Why did this family, living in this meticulously designed beauty, deserve such fury? The beauty that was supposed to be their armor became a target itself. What is hidden behind this perfect facade? What debt was left unpaid? What cry was left unheard? The explosion of 1981 was not the beginning of a war. It was just another bill presented to the stone. Because this stone remembers everything. It remembers what it stands on. What original sin lies in the very foundation of this house? To find the answer, you have to dig. deeper than a soldier's grave, deeper than the foundation of this house. You have to go through the manicured turf, through the layer of gravel, through the clay, and down to the very rock, to the bones of this land. There, in the cold darkness of history, lies the original sin. The year is 1610. This land did not yet know straight lines. It breathed mists and legends. It had another name, spoken in another tongue. It belonged to the O'Neill clan, whose power was as old as the surrounding hills. But their time was up. After the defeat and flight of the earls, the land was orphaned, and new masters descended upon this wound like vultures. This was not a story of noble pioneers taming a wild frontier. It was a cold, calculated redistribution of power, sanctioned by the king in distant London. The map of the world was redrawn by force. The name of James Hamilton, the first Earl of Abercorn, appeared on documents that smelled of wax seals and betrayal. He, a loyal Scottish aristocrat, was granted 2,000 acres of Irish land. Granted. What a clean, sterile word for such a dirty business. The land was not bought. It was taken, confiscated. This was not a deal. It was a trophy, payment for loyalty to the crown, a reward for helping to pacify Ireland. The foundation of the Hamilton family's wealth was laid not on stone, but on the bones of the Gaelic aristocracy, on the humiliation of an entire people. And from that moment, the land began to work in a new way. It was turned into a machine for making money. The Hamiltons, like many other planters, became absentee landlords. Their bodies warmed themselves by fireplaces in English manors. Their voices echoed in the halls of Westminster, but their wealth grew here, in the Irish mud. Imagine this flow, a river of silver flowing east. It originates in the calloused hands of an Irish farmer, paying rent for the right to work the land where his ancestors were kings. It flows through the offices of land agents who take their cut, and it pours into the family's treasury in London. There, in the capital of the empire, this dirty Irish money is laundered. It is transformed into political influence, into titles, into advantageous marriages, into silks and works of art. This system worked for centuries, flawlessly. Every penny squeezed from this land strengthened the family's power. Every failed harvest, every eviction, every desperate face of a tenant was another brick in the wall of their prosperity. The luxury we will see in Baronscourt was paid for by the poverty of thousands of nameless people. The sparkle of its chandeliers is crystallized tears. There it is, the original sin. This house, not even built yet, was already cursed. It was conceived as a monument to success, but its true foundation is the defeat of others. It was meant to be a symbol of order and civilization, but it was born from an act of conquest. And the land forgets nothing. It soaks up the blood. It remembers the injustice. And it waits. It waits for the time to present the bill. Every great sin needs its prophet. This stone had one. His name was James Hamilton, the first Marquess of Abercorn. His contemporaries nicknamed him Don Magnifico. And that nickname is not a compliment. It's a diagnosis. He moved as if the very air around him was too vulgar to touch. His back was as straight as a Roman temple column, and his gaze was as cold as a winter morning over the lake. It was said that at the dinner table, he forced his family to speak exclusively in French, not out of love for the language, out of contempt for everything that was outside the window. He was sick with status. As a Scottish aristocrat with Irish holdings, he was always an outsider in the high society of London, a provincial with questionable money. and this gnawing sense of inadequacy ate at him from the inside. He needed an answer, an argument that could not be disputed, proof of his greatness carved in stone. That argument was to be Baronscourt. He decided to build not a house, he decided to build a weapon, a temple dedicated to his own importance. And for this temple, he chose the only language he deemed correct: neoclassicism. This was not a matter of taste, it was politics. Every portico, every perfect line of the facade had to scream the same message. We are the new Rome. We bring the light of reason and order to these savage Celtic lands. It was the architecture of arrogance, a conqueror's manifesto. To realize this vision, he hired not just an architect, he hired a legend. Sir John Soane, the man who built the Bank of England. The very act of hiring Soane was a shot fired in an information war. It told London society, I can afford this, I am one of you. And he paid any price. To find the money for his temple, Don Magnifico did the unthinkable. He sold his ancestral lands in Scotland. He cut his own roots, trading his family's real history for an artificial dream built on someone else's land. The Scottish mud was washed away to make room for Irish pain, melted down into gold. And then he made the main, decisive gesture, a gesture of absolute contempt. He turned his future house around. The main facade, with its majestic Ionian columns, was not to face the nearest town, not the road on which the common Irish people traveled. No. He turned the house's back to the real world. He had it face his own, man-made universe, the perfect lawns and artificial lakes that had yet to be dug. This was the final break. He wasn't creating an estate. He was creating a separate planet, a hermetically sealed capsule of civilization, as he understood it, in the middle of a hostile universe. And from that moment, the house ceased to be just a building. It became a border, a wall between the world of order and the world of chaos, between him and them. Don Magnifico got his temple, but every temple has an altar that demands sacrifice, and this altar had not even begun to sate its hunger. This was not a construction project. This was a war declared on chaos by one man. On the architect's parchment, everything was flawless. Clean lines, perfect proportions, harmony, frozen in ink. But reality was a sea of mud in which hundreds of men floundered. The air trembled with the clang of hammers on stone, the creak of winches, and the hoarse shouts of overseers. It smelled of damp clay, freshly cut timber, and stubbornness. The dream of symmetry was born from the chaos of human effort. And this war was fought on several fronts at once. The first to fall was the architect. George Stewart, hired to begin the work, proved not to be brilliant enough for Don the Magnificent. He was fired, mercilessly. This was not just a client's whim. It was an assertion of power. The Marquis was making it clear, there is only one creator here, and it is him. Then, an external enemy struck. Across the English Channel, revolutionary France was ablaze, and Britain went to war. The economy began to fray at the seams. The price of building materials skyrocketed. Every nail became more expensive than gold. Every beam brought from overseas became a treasure. The project's financial foundation began to crumble. But the Marquis's obsession knew no retreat. He went into debt, mortgaged his family's future, but continued to build. But the most stubborn enemy was the land itself, the Irish land. It did not surrender without a fight. Don the Magnificent decided that nature was merely raw material for his will. He ordered the landscape to be reshaped. Hills that had stood for millennia were to be leveled. Bogs where ancient Celts had drowned were to be drained. Streams that ran according to their own laws were to be locked into new channels. Thousands of hands with shovels and pickaxes dug into the unyielding soil. They created artificial lakes named after the women of the family: Lough Catherine, Lough Fanny, Lough Mary. He gave them names as if branding cattle. This was the ultimate form of control, not just to own the land, but to recreate it in his own image and likeness. And in the midst of this madness, like an obsessed conductor in the eye of a hurricane, stood Don the Magnificent. He trusted no one. His letters to the new architect, Sir John Soane, were not requests, but commands. He demanded endless changes, personally inspecting the quality of the Portland stone brought from England. He wasn't building a house. He was building a fortress for his mind, where every corner had to be perfectly straight to compensate for the crookedness of the world outside his gates. And so, slowly, painfully, something different began to emerge from the mud and chaos. Order, symmetry. Stone walls rose, cutting off the wild landscape. Columns stood in a perfect line, like soldiers on parade. The war with chaos was won, but every victory has its price. This house was born not of love, but of struggle. Its walls absorbed not only the rain, but also the sweat, the debts, and the arrogance of its creator. Chaos did not disappear. It was simply locked outside, and it was waiting for its moment, lurking in the woods and in the hearts of the people who watched this stone monster being born. The stone was set, the war was over, and life began, or rather, a flawless imitation of it. The light of 1,000 candles trembled in the crystal chandeliers, reflecting in mirrors and in the empty eyes of the guests. The air in the ballroom was thick, heavy with the smell of wax, expensive perfumes, and quiet boredom. Outside the windows, the Irish night, black as peat. But here, inside, an artificial day reigned. Violins sang of a love that wasn't there. Silk rustled, hiding bodies that were cold even by the fire. It was a theater, a one-man show starring Don the Magnificent. He had his stage. The long gallery, hung with ancestral portraits, became his corridor of glory. The enormous dining room, where dishes with French names were served, became his throne room. Baronscourt was his magnum opus, and all who lived in it were mere props. His family obeyed the unwritten laws of this stage. Footsteps had to be quiet, so as not to disturb the echo of greatness. Voices had to be hushed, so as not to drown out the whisper of the walls. This was not a cozy home. It was a machine of rituals. Every reception, every dinner, every visit from the aristocracy of Dublin or London was a carefully staged performance designed to prove one thing: we are the center of the universe. But behind the glittering facade of this life, there was emptiness, a coldness. The marble floors were cold to the touch. The high ceilings sucked out the warmth, and the Marquis himself, aloof and proud, was colder than any stone in the house. He had built a monument to himself, but it was impossible to live in. Too much space, too little life. This was not a fortress protecting against enemies. It was a golden cage, protecting against feelings, and the volcano was breathing. Out there, beyond the miles of stone walls, beyond the man-made lakes and perfect lawns, the world did not obey the rules of French etiquette. In the huts, where hearths smoked and there was no dinner, a sullen discontent was growing. It festered slowly, like a disease. The starving tenants, whose money paid for these balls, gathered at night. They formed secret societies, the ribbonmen, the white boys. Their names changed, but their essence remained the same. It was the land, reminding them of its presence. Their emblems were not coats of arms, but burned haystacks. Their messages were not calligraphed letters, but mutilated cattle. It was a quiet, agrarian terror, a whisper that seeped through the thickest walls. The estate managers began to look over their shoulders as they walked through their own fields. The gaze of every peasant seemed like an accusation. Baronscourt shone in the night like a jewel thrown into the mud, but its inhabitants were dancing on a volcano. They heard the rumbling, but mistook it for the beating of their own hearts. They felt the heat, but blamed it on the warmth from the fireplaces. They had built their perfect world on the side of a mountain that was about to erupt, and the glitter of gold only made them a better target. The volcano never erupted. There were no rivers of fiery lava, no storming of the gates with pitchforks and torches. The revolution, when it came, was quiet. It smelled not of gunpowder, but of ink and cheap paper. The blow came not from peasants in rags, but from gentlemen in suits, from the corridors of power in Westminster, the late 19th century. The world was changing. The idea that land could belong to a handful of people living hundreds of miles away began to seem not just unjust, but barbaric. The voice of Ireland, long a whisper, was growing louder, and it was heard. Parliament passed a series of laws, the Irish Land Acts. The word sounded dry, bureaucratic, but for houses like Baronscourt, it was a death sentence issued on stamped paper. The essence was simple and devastating. The Hamilton family, like other great landowners, was being compelled, not asked, but compelled to sell their lands, to sell them to those who worked them, to the tenants, to the descendants of those from whom the land had been taken 300 years before. This was not just a financial blow. It was an earthquake that shattered the very foundation of their world. For 3 centuries, their power, their status, their wealth, it had all grown from the land. Rent was the blood that fed this stone organism, and now that blood supply was being cut off. The economic engine that had run so flawlessly, turning Irish poverty into aristocratic luxury, sputtered to a halt. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. The family lost 93% of its holdings. 76,000 acres became 5,000. An empire the size of a small European state shrank to the size of a garden plot. And suddenly, the house changed. It was no longer a symbol of power. It had become a millstone, a giant, unliftable financial millstone hanging around its owners' necks. Hundreds of rooms to heat, miles of roofs to repair, thousands of windows through which the winds of change were blowing. All of this required money, and the source of that money had dried up. The beginning of the end is not a gunshot, not an explosion. It is the stroke of a pen in a distant London, a stroke that returned the land to those to whom it belonged by right of blood and sweat. The house was orphaned. It stood amidst its pathetic remains, like a king stripped of his kingdom. Enormous, majestic, and utterly useless. It had won the war against chaos, but it had lost the war against time. And now it had to learn to survive in a new, alien world, a world where the ground beneath its foundation no longer belonged to it. The 20th century came to Baronscourt, not with champagne, but with an auctioneer's gavel. The agony began, a long, torturous siege lasting a century. The first enemy was the very empire they had served so loyally. Inheritance taxes, death duties, as the aristocrats called them, a merciless financial mechanism designed to shatter great fortunes. And every time another duke died, the state would extend its bony hand and take its share. To pay, they had to sell the soul of the house. Paintings by geniuses went under the hammer to cover bills from the tax inspector. Portraits of ancestors, who had stared down from the walls with haughty calm for centuries, were sent off to the dusty vaults of museums or into the collections of American nouveau riche. The house bled out: art, furniture, silver. Every masterpiece sold was a small death. Then came the fire, 1949. A flame, born somewhere in the guts of the house, broke free. It devoured wood, licked stone, turning history to ash. The heart of the house, the creations of Sir John Soane, his famous rotunda, his majestic halls, all of it collapsed into a fiery hell. The firefighters pumped water from the same artificial lakes that Don the Magnificent had created, but it was too late. The house was gutted. Only a charred stone skeleton remained. It was rebuilt, but the scar remained forever. It was an omen. And then the troubles began, and the old ghosts returned. This time, they carried not pitchforks, but Armalite rifles and Semtex explosives. The hatred that had smoldered for centuries flared up with new force, and Baronscourt, as a symbol of everything they despised, became the perfect target. The siege became real. The house was turned into a military installation. Bulletproof glass, armed guards, a telephone line leading directly to the police barracks. The lives of several generations were spent in the crosshairs. It was a reckoning. Slow, methodical, stretched over decades. A reckoning for the sins of their ancestors, which caught up with them centuries later. The assassination attempt of 1981 was merely the loudest act in this long drama. In 1985, a bomb was planted in the library itself. The fire was extinguished, but the smell of burning mingled with the smell of old books. The enemy had shown that he could get inside, that there were no more safe rooms. Later, a homemade mortar was found on the estate grounds. A few pipes welded together, aimed at the main house. It failed to fire. The family was saved by a technical malfunction. Luck. Or perhaps the house itself, tired of the violence, refused to accept more metal into its body. Every day was a test. Every guest could be a traitor. Every worker, an informant. The children grew up knowing that the world beyond their park gates wanted them dead. The house survived. Stubbornly. The stone proved stronger than human hatred, but every attack, every tax, every fire left its mark. It stood, wounded but not broken, like an old soldier, covered in scars, who no longer remembers what he fought for, but remembers every wound. And so we are here again, in the silence. But now we know the price of this silence. We hear not the rustle of leaves, but the echo of explosions. We see not a reflection in the lake, but the ghosts of drowned hopes. Don the Magnificent is dead. His empire is dust. But his descendant, the current Duke of Abercorn, still walks these creaking floors. Only now he is not a lord enjoying his rents. He is a businessman, a managing director on the brink of bankruptcy. He doesn't throw balls. He drafts business plans. The forest, meant to be a backdrop for the hunt, is now a commercial timberland. The trees have become a commodity. The cottages, where gamekeepers and servants once lived, are rented out to tourists seeking an authentic Irish experience. The stables, which housed thoroughbred steeds, have been converted into a wedding venue. The house, which was built to drain money from Ireland, is now forced to court it, offering its services. From a symbol of oppression, it has become a local employer. What a bitter irony. The ghost of the past has not disappeared. It sits at every table, looks out of every window. It is in the very DNA of this stone. The ambitions of one man, his thirst for status, his war against chaos, all of it created a monument that for 400 years was at war with the land on which it stood. It poisoned the land with its arrogance, and the land answered with the slow poison of hatred. And now, to survive, this house is forced to serve the land it tried to conquer, to serve the people it despised. Look at it in the rays of the setting sun. The stone absorbs the last of the light, and it seems as if it is bleeding. It has endured. But at what cost? It survived confiscations, famine, revolutions, taxes, fires, and bombs. It proved more durable than dynasties and empires. The verdict of time has been delivered. Ambitions have crumbled. Only the stone remains, and it remembers everything. We have seen the history not just of a house, but of a struggle. The struggle of human will, striving to carve its order into stone, and the memory of the land itself, which never forgives the original sin. This stone has endured, but victory has turned into subjugation. To live, it is forced to serve that which it tried to conquer. Can beauty born from violence ever atone for its sin? Or will it forever remain merely a gilded wound on the body of history, which remembers everything? This story, carved in stone, is not finished. It continues in our dialogue. Share your thoughts below. If these reflections resonate with you, stay with us so we can seek answers together. Your support is a sign that these questions matter not just to us,